Grass, it's where bugs fuck. I'm now probably standing on an ungodly orgy. Am I jealous? Yes. Anyway, hello my dear friends, how is it going? I'm Ari Thurger, and today I'm here to have a little talk about a subject that bothers me, and I'm sure many of you deal with this quite often, especially if you live in a city or near a more urbanized area. I thought about making a video about the impact of colonization of land that doesn't have human beings yet. From an animistic perspective, the human impact on a land can be quite devastating precisely from an animistic perception. The exploitation of resources, the destruction of habitats, the loss of fauna and flora due to the careless treatment of autochthonous species, and of course, the very impact of all of this upon the unseen populations, the one we often call spirits. Even though I eventually plan on doing a video like that in the future, I have realized that we now live in a completely materialistic society governed by capitalism, which means the great majority of people, unfortunately and understandably, are not predisposed to engage with land on an animistic level yet, much less on a spiritual one. So we do have to turn the speech around. Nowadays, instead of instructing the importance of preserving habitats and their species and the impact of human action upon the populations of entities we often call spirits, in order to educate humanity, to have a more careful approach towards nature, to prevent the collapse of environment, of the ecosystems and life, which ultimately affects us on an irreversible level. But all of this is introduction through a spiritual approach. Well, instead of a spiritual approach and or an animistic perception, nowadays we have to start from the materialistic point of view and progressively walk towards a spiritual one. So the speech has to be turned to the immediate visible impact and the things we can immediately see and touch and interact with, especially in our daily lives within a civilizational environment. From the smallest attitudes to the wider impact. As such, I thought about the issue of colonizing grass. We have two main problems here, which are the systematic maintenance of grass, be that lawns or the general grass fields of urban parks, and the substitution of native flora for this type of shortcut grass which serves nothing but simply existing for aesthetic purposes. I do not presume to know where you live. However, this has been a reality for many people within civilizational environments. I often hear people complaining about the lack of fauna, especially of birds and insects, and at the same time complaining every time a local park or just a grass area has its vegetation a little bit taller than usual and flowers are growing, popping up, and it seems abandoned and the proper authorities are not taking care of the situation. There is a very fixed notion of what vegetation should look like in order to look beautiful, orderly, and aesthetically pleasing. So it bothers people when areas with vegetation grow too much. As such, the vegetation in those areas are cut. We are mainly talking about parks and gardens within urbanized areas, as well as lawns and front and backyards, where people constantly mow the vegetation to be appealing to the human eye. At the same time, people complain about the lack of birds, insects, especially of species that are natural pollinators. Obviously, these two things are connected. I believe that it is indeed possible for the human being to live in an urban area and at the same time create a space that harmoniously can coexist with nature, providing habitat for both humans and non-human species. We have environmental engineers and landscape architects whose job, in part, is precisely to create a balance between the urban reality and nature's reality. But it seems they are not doing a very good job. which isn't entirely their fault, because they have to obey the demands of the government in terms of occupying natural habitats to build infrastructures. What I see is that the general population, like you and I, are more open to have discussions on environmental issues, and there's a genuine worry about the impact we humans have upon nature and its persons, as well as trying to create an existence where human and everything else of the natural world can coexist. Because civilization is expanding, more roads, more houses, more offices, more buildings of all sorts are taking more land. However, from the part of the governments, the narrative is different, and they don't seem to care much about the impact civilization has upon natural land and its persons. So it's up to us to make the change through speeches like this one, creating awareness, educating people on these matters, show the clear negative impact we have on land and life, starting with the small wrong things that are so fixed in our society that it completely passes unnoticed. But the small and constant errors we do continue to have a huge negative impact. So this is when colonization of grass comes in, or so I call it. The constant errors of mowing lawns and destroying vegetation for the sake of what is aesthetically pleasing to the human eye, due to simply getting used to see what society has agreed to be the proper display of vegetation. The thing is, grass in parks, gardens, lawns, whatever, isn't totally bad. It's actually quite positive. It has its uses and can indeed be turned into something very good, very positive, if we treat it right, if we allow grasses to, and other vegetations to properly grow and tend to them as if we were indeed tending to a thriving garden or ecosystem from which we depend on to live and survive, because we very much do actually. Grass is frequently planted in parks and gardens and people's house backyards and such. Grass allows prevention of soil erosion by means of protecting soil in an area with its impressive, outstanding root networks. Grasses naturally make the soil healthy and fertile. Grass also allows the absorption of rainwater, not only preserving water, which is needed to maintain life, but also lowering the hazard of flooding and improving soil moisture. Grass is also a natural filter that can enhance the quality of air, and it filters air pollution and other dirt particles, making the air more breathable. It absorbs carbon dioxide, reducing greenhouse fuel. And all of this makes the water it absorbs cleaner. In addition to all of this, grass creates habitat to a variety of animals and creates food. It preserves and maintains and allows to grow wildlife. This final point is the preservation of several pollinators as well, which we need for obvious reasons, spoken hundreds of thousands of times, the importance pollinators have on the preservation and continuation of life. But it also gives home to several insects, which ultimately call upon several other animals that are also pollinators and come to eat insects. The more food there is for them, the likely they will stay and form a healthy and thriving environment, ecosystem. Let's take the example of bats. A bat can eat 1,000 to 4,000 bugs a night. The more grass there is, tall vegetation, flowers, a thriving flora, the more insects there will be, and the more food a bat will have, and it will remain in the area. Bats are hugely important pollinators. Tall vegetation is also house to several pests, which are contained if several other animals are in the area to eat them. But they will only be in the area if they have food and home. And that means tall vegetation, bushes, trees, shrubs, and so on and so forth. The fewer trees there are, the fewer birds, no natural predators to these pests, and thus pests thrive and affect the human quality of life with the several diseases they can bring and carry, such as Ebola, COVID, etc. Tall grass, tall vegetation is necessary to preserve species, maintain life, give quality to life, soil quality, water quality, preservation of life and maintaining that life, for all the reasons previously pointed and others. However, all this usefulness pointed here doesn't actually exist if we keep mowing grass. Grass seems to exist only in its close-cropped form because it is the aesthetically desirable visual landscape for the modern post-industrial human being, which favors a green ground that presents a homogeneous, lush panorama that serves nothing other than being visually attractive over an actual grassland that naturally grows and preserves life. The way we administrate these gardens and the natural park areas within the urban environment is simply with the objective to have something beautiful instead of something useful, which could exist for our own safety and preservation as beings of this world. What we do with grass has been for the sake of being aesthetically pleasing or desirable. But we do not live in a time where we can afford to control nature in order to create something that is simply for our amusement. We need to preserve habitats. And the more civilization pushes away nature and invades land, the more we need to create an environment where civilization and nature can coexist and thrive. And gardens and parks don't have to disappear, mind you. We just have to let them exist. The way we treat grass in these environments to become something visually attractive became popular with the European aristocracy of the Middle Ages, creating their neatly shaped gardens in their castles and palaces. But it was eventually expanded beyond such aristocratic spaces. The origins of the popularity of these closed mow or closed cropped grasses for aesthetic purposes in parks, gardens, and in the cities and in public spaces only comes in the 18th century trends to create replicas of the romantic aesthetics of landscapes and grasslands from rural Italian landscapes portrayed in paintings. And since then, it has become so normalized that it passes as the only way we should have vegetation. Which is why many people immediately complain when vegetation is slightly tall in urban areas and seemingly taking over the sidewalk. Good God. There's this fervent need to see it all cut, ripped out or destroyed because it's not supposed to look wild, but instead orderly, contained to please the human eye. It's madness. It's stupidity. People complain about the loss of wildlife and pollinators and are worried about the future of the world due to the loss of fauna and flora, but keep mowing their lawns. These small, almost mechanic actions have a huge negative impact upon life. This is what is immediately perceived and we can act upon in an easier manner before we jump into the consequences this has upon the unseen populations of beings, what we often call spirits. Before we jump into a more animistic perception of the world, which indeed I do believe it is highly necessary in order to better create relationships of mutual respect with life, nature, and the land and its persons. But first, in a highly materialistic society, we have to start from the point where human negative impact is rapidly perceivable in order to create a rapid change. There's no point in trying to educate people on the importance of respecting nature and life from an animistic point of view, which indeed more deeply and in a far more sensitive way explains the impact of human life on the planet and its cycles, if we don't first educate people on the immediate actions they can take or change in order to at least minimize harm and damage we have upon life and this world. Nowadays, in a totally materialistic society governed by capitalism, animism can only have a greater positive impact if we show people how much they can change for the better through actions that can be immediately seen, taken, and felt by the materialistic mind. Only then can we walk towards a better spiritual comprehension, as soon as we are aware of the real impact we can have. How we physically affect things will also affect the spiritual, surely. But in this collective materialistic mind, we have to show the materialistic effects, because most people are now programmed to better understand the material. If you take my meaning, of course. Now, I have seen change. When I was on vacations and working on the Netherlands, in Holland, Low Countries, whatever, I've seen local parks, gardens, sidewalk, vegetation, trees, bushes, and grass on houses, hotels, buildings of all sorts, not just present for aesthetic reasons, but also for their usefulness and to safeguard fauna and flora, especially existing for the preservation of pollinators and to give habitat to a variety of animals that live in cities or flock to the cities. In the Netherlands, as well as in other countries, of course, fortunately, lawns are progressively disappearing in favor of tall vegetation, especially plantation of flowers to preserve fauna and flora. It's beautiful and it serves an actual purpose. Cities spend millions in water and taxpayer money in preserving close-cropped grasses to maintain something that is only aesthetically pleasing. What the Netherlands and other countries are doing, by the way, kudos to all of those that do this, is letting the vegetation grow, planting flowers with minimum maintenance, if any, saving millions in water and money every year, money from the pocket of taxpayers, which now can be channeled to other equally important areas for a better quality of life. And at the same time, they preserve fauna, flora, and water, and have a positive and active action on preservation of the environment, of ecosystems, which has a huge impact on the fight against climate and environmental changes that are affecting us all. Furthermore, the plantation of the same type of grass in parks just because it is aesthetically pleasing destroys native flora and, by consequence or by extension, native fauna. It is highly important to plant endemic species for the preservation of those species and the preservation of native fauna that thrives and exists and has adapted to the native flora. Japan was doing or is doing a wonderful thing, which some European countries fortunately have been adopting very slowly, which are these little islands of vegetation in local parks, right? Islands of native flora, preserving endemic species of plants and other vegetations, as well as preserving native fauna, because animals end up returning to those spaces where they feel protected, where they have food, and where they can thrive and continue to exist. But it's not just this aspect of the negative impact of growing grass that is not native to the natural environments where urbanization has been building upon. From the moment we replace native flora and even the continuous mowing of the grasses we have chosen to have in gardens and parks, we are also destroying food and medicine. If we allow these grasses to grow, the ones we are surrounded by in local parks, we will find a lot of food and natural medicine, dandelions, chamomile, several types of lettuce, mustard, etc. The same thing goes for the replacement of native vegetation in favor of the aesthetically pleasing grass of the romantic ideals based on rural Italian landscapes. We take away natural medicine and food endemic to the area. The colonization of grass, the colonization of vegetation, the colonization of fauna and flora. We take away native food and medicine and replace it for a grass that we do not even allow it to grow and thrive in favor of something that only serves to maintain a very specific human sense of beauty. Some years back, I was watching a documentary of some French anthropologists. I'm sorry, but I don't remember the name of the documentary. It was practically over 2 decades ago or something. But he was showing indigenous people of some jungle area on the TV. He was showing them on the TV footage of the gardens in the Château de Versailles, right? The indigenous people were laughing. They did not understand why other human beings would mow the grass and would cut and shape the bushes and plant the trees in a geometric arrangement. Because, to them, there was no need to do that in their reality. They barely needed to touch anything within their natural habitat. They were surrounded by natural environment. They live in an ecosystem, a thriving ecosystem, which they did not have to change and reshape or cut or plant. In their own words, nature gave them everything they needed. They allowed it to grow, thrive, and exist because it ultimately gives food and medicine and even shelter. Mind you, I'm not saying we should abandon civilization and go back to live in the forests. That would be nice, but it's not going to happen. Besides, we have evolved and there's indeed plenty of things in today's world that facilitates our life and gives quality to our lives. What I'm saying is that it is possible to coexist with nature and create environments where urbanization and nature can coexist. And we can live, grow, and thrive with nature. We can allow vegetation to grow. We have to plant native flora. We can grow food and medicine. Even agriculture, we are doing it wrong, but that's a whole other matter. For thousands of years, we are still doing the same method of devastating entire forested areas and vegetation, growing crops to the point of saturation of the soils, creating desertification of landscape. But this is also changing within civilizational environments, fortunately. There's already people, groups, movements, etc., which are creating natural environments by planting types of trees, vegetation of all sorts, that give food, sustenance, in a way that there's little maintenance, if any at all, because the aim is to create spaces where specific types of vegetation and trees have a symbiotic existence and are not types of plants that are parasitic to each other. These human-made environments, ecosystems actually, create food, maintain healthy soils, save water, and protect both fauna and flora, and ultimately, the whole environment, the whole ecosystem. If our governments are not aware of all of this that has been said throughout this video and more, it's up to us to push forward, create awareness, and demand these changes. It's our life that is at stake, our well-being. We must look at these wonderful ideas others are having in terms of environmental issues and plant them where we live, quite literally, especially starting within civilizational environments, because those are the environments that keep pushing nature away and keep on eating more land. Not so long ago, I was talking with a friend of mine who is far more acquainted with the indigenous populations of the Amazon. By the way, indigenous populations are still the ones that have a far bigger positive impact on the natural environment, on the ecosystems, and more than anyone else, they know how to better preserve it. It's no coincidence their belief systems are mainly animistic. But again, within a civilizational society such as the ones most of us live in a post-industrial materialistic perception of the world, we do have to start from that point of view and then back to animism and not the other way around, at least at this point. Anyway, as I was saying, I was talking with this friend of mine, and indigenous populations of the Amazon barely touch the natural environment they live in. They have trails, a network of trails, where they walk to places where there's water, they can drink, plants to gather, animals to fish and hunt. They barely kill animals, by the way. They gather more than they fish or hunt. However, they are not as sedentary as we are. They gather food and water from different places, going on these trails to different places and never gathering from the same place for a long time, for a long period. They gather at a place and then allow it to grow and live and thrive while they gather more food in other different places. Always moving, always shifting. They gather what they need, no more, no less. Again, nature gives us what we need. And it is true. The great problem here, as many may think, isn't the continuous growing of human population, and as such, it's necessary vast portions of land to grow food. No, not at all. The problem isn't the growth of human populations. The problem is greediness and producing more than what we can consume. The problem was one day an individual stopped gathering what he needed and thought, what if I gather much more or all of this and control the area and trade it for something else? The problem is taking resources, taking land and selling it all to those in need in exchange for more power to control more land, control more resources, and more people exploiting everything to gain more power. We are not taking what we need. We are exploiting to exhaustion and extinction. This is the colonization of grass, colonization of vegetation, colonization of land. Nature truly gives everything we need, but we often want more than what it can give. There's plenty, there is for all, but we colonize land to feed greediness by exploiting the empty stomach of the land. We are land, we are nature. Nature will treat us the same way we treat nature. So small changes within, we have to start from there, especially us non-indigenous people within a civilizational environment. Start with the grass in our gardens, in our parks, in our backyards. Let it grow, let it thrive, let it exist. And my dear friends, I do hope very much that this video was useful. And in these 7 years of creating content for YouTube, I've barely asked this, but this time here it goes. Pass the message around, share this video, please. Start discussions on this topic, create awareness. Thank you. Of course, obviously, thank you very much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, thank you for today. Until we meet again, my dear friends.